Hey folks, we are live. I think there's a commercial playing for you right now, but we are officially live on YouTube. So I'm here with Kirby Vernakovich from allpointsdesign.ca, and today we're going to be talking about selling permaculture projects and writing effective contracts. So if you're just signing into the live stream right now, please put your name and where you're calling in from up into the chat. We'd love to see where you're calling in from. And we'd also like to know one thing that you'd like to get out of today's call. So just find the chat over to the right-hand side and put up your name, where you're calling in from, and one thing that you want to get out of today's call. Hey, Javin, how you doing today?
I'm good, Rob. Thanks so much. It's a grand day out in the Lower Mainland, and finally got a little bit of break from a really massive rain event we had last night. So nice to see a bit of sun.
Perfect. How much rain did you guys get?
I haven't checked into it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we were probably 20 mil, maybe.
Wow. Yeah, that is pretty big. Crazy. Let's wait a couple more minutes before we crack into the content here. And so I'll just throw it out there again, guys. If you're just signing in, put your name and where you're calling in from and one thing you hope to get out of today's call. And Javin, what you've been working on lately? You have a pretty interesting project. Are you allowed to talk about it live on YouTube?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Live on YouTube or otherwise. So a little while ago, my brother, Aaron Bernakovich of 4K Productions out of Calgary, who's a cinematographer, dropped me a line and said that there was an opportunity to build a documentary pitch. And so we built a pitch about this idea that we are in fire ecology, and we've gotten into a place to where we don't necessarily believe that the fires should be here, or that the intensity or the severity or the frequency have any root causes. It's kind of like, whenever there's a fire and you have the firefighters go, we always look for what the cause was, where the oily rag was. Whenever there's a problem with a car, we try to find where the cause is. And I think a lot of that conversation of why are we in the place that we're in with wildfires has gone abandoned. And because of that, we've lost a lot of the agency and the ability to respond to them. So we ended up making a pitch video called Facing Fire, Building Resiliency to Wildfire, to the Tell a Story Hive creator funding program. And we got accepted. So we're now 3 days in. I'm completely overwhelmed. I have no problem saying that. Just had an amazing interview this morning with Robert W. Gray, all about how we got to where we are. And he's actually working on a 1.3 million acre fire resiliency plan up in Quesnel. And it's just incredible to see folks working at such a high level of conversation with such a broad scale. He's had a lot of success working with First Nations. And there was one, I'm just going to talk about this now, Rob. I'll say this, then we'll go back.
No worries. It's all good.
There was one, and I almost want to just bring up the note about it, but there was this prescribed burn down in the States. So the Fort Apache and the San Carlos Apache, they've been really active and aggressive in their prescribed burns and starting to mimic the patch. They're called patches when you burn a small area or a small area isn't burnable. And what's been found is that when fires are moving through governmental land or public lands, they'll come up against the boundary of the reservation and they'll full on stop because of this patchwork network. As big fires come up against areas that have patches that can't be burned or have been burned before, they stop. And it's a really exceptional deterrent for fires to spread and create these large tracts that have been burnt. So that was another really neat little new thing I learned this morning.
Yeah, that's super cool. It's amazing how we always we try these new things and then we inevitably come back to what was being done thousands and thousands of years ago. And it makes you wonder what other domains we should be looking at to apply that. I'm in a similar situation right now. Similar and different, trying to sort out educational options for my kids. And it's an incredible conversation that we should probably have at another time about education and going back to ancient patterns about how kids used to learn and how they still are capable of learning. But it seems to permeate all domains. You just have to seek the right conversation. So awesome. Well, we've got a few people online now, so why don't we kick into gear here and start talking about today's topic, which is about selling jobs and writing contracts and generally doing all the stuff that most consultants and landscapers and architects and engineers and generally anybody that's trying to provide a service and even sometimes a product despise, because they were never taught how to do it. I think part of it too is how like the resistance is based around all the legalese that we're constantly surrounded about or by, and how uncomfortable that makes us feel, and how most of us can't even understand what they're trying to say in those legal contracts and stuff. So it's going to be a great conversation today. And if you're in a business like a landscaping business or permaculture design or regenerative agriculture, CSA farming, anything that involves selling and contracts, I think you're going to get a ton out of today's session.
So I think what we'll start, Rob, is just start talking about how this information for us has really been encapsulated underneath this idea of the regenerative business mentorship process and program. And
great.
So Rob and I have been collaborating now for a year and a half, and we wanted to take all of the lessons, the failures, the successes, everything, and put it under some kind of house that could host this conversation and help other people level up. Rob and I continually talk about this idea that there is a tsunami level wave of desire and need for regenerative solutions, intelligent solutions, systems-based solutions and conversations. And we wanted to help people level up so that way they could ride the wave better and catch the even bigger wave that's coming behind it. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to vergepermaculture.ca/RBM. But this conversation is really about this statement, the fact that you, me, Rob, all of us want to save the world, but at some point or another, we become burnt out. We feel like we can't fill our wallets, which of course has a trickle down to our families, to being able to do what we need to do, to our sleep, to our health. And Rob and I have both been there. We didn't like it. And so we distilled 20 years of failures and successes into principles that allow consultants, designers, installers, and others. We've had great people in the program who we would have never imagined would be there, like people who are trying to help independent musicians get off music labels, individuals who are doing herbal remedies, people who are farmers, really to create successful, profitable projects, regardless of what that domain is, that leave clients ecstatic and with you the time to enjoy your life. Now, all of that last sentence, you're not really eligible for that unless you start to understand sales. And that's where we wanted to talk today, is that once we have this idea of sales and what can we do and how can we have it in a way that works really well, then we can start to have the rest of those conversations. And something I proposed to Rob before we started was just kind of starting by mining some of our problems we had with sales, or some like spectacular failures. I know I've got one or two I'd like to share, but Rob, is there a few that come to mind in the design and consulting realm in terms of problems or failures that you had that made you go, yeah, I should probably get better at this?
Well, I don't have any specific examples, but I think the reason that I don't is because they were so traumatic that it burned part of my brain away from me or something. But I do have a very keen memory of getting on sales calls. And just a little bit of background, I'm a consulting engineer. I started off in the oil and gas industry. And so I was always kind of behind the desk, the cog in the machine, doing the designs, the technical guy that designed the pipeline. So I was very comfortable being in that space. But when I left the oil and gas industry and went off on my own, all of a sudden I found myself having to sell projects. So no longer could I just be the technician doing the design, which is what I went into my business to do unique design that was not oil and gas work. While I liked oil and gas work, I wanted to do something different. And now all of a sudden I was on the front end of these projects, having to sell them, having to write contracts, having to, manage expectations, figuring out what to charge. And I remember trying to sell these projects, and people would call me up and say, well, how can I hire you? And it'd be like, well, I don't really know. And, it depends. And sometimes I do it this way and sometimes I do it that way. And, we have this thing where we do these perma blitzes. And so you can hire me to, design your property for $1,000. And, it's a really great deal because I'll bring a whole bunch of people over to your property and do your installation for free. So you're really not paying very much money, and kind of coming at it from a place of apology almost.
Mm.
And just like you could hear, even though you couldn't see the person, the kind of cringe of uncomfort that they were getting, even though they continued to stay on the phone call. I'm sure that part of them inside was trying to figure out how they could get out of this conversation that they had started with me. And then the contracts, oh my gosh, like, what the heck was that? And how do I write that? And these weird antiquated words and agreements and all of this stuff. And it was the most uncomfortable part of my permaculture career that I can remember. And it was that uncomfort that created and you and I are both pretty good about doing this, is that when we feel pain and suffering inside, it usually is just feedback that we have to improve, a weak link that we've clearly identified as a result of that pain and suffering. And so that led me down the route of trying to learn everything that I could about sales and contracts and all of that stuff. So how about you?
I think I've got a lot of specifics. I imagine that'll resonate with a lot of people, because I think the big thing is that, as we've talked about, there's three major conversations within business. There's doing the work, the technician. There's the reputation, so people know that you're the person to do the work. And then last but not least, there's the sale. And when we are technicians, we tend to take the information we have from being a technician and we tend to apply it to the other two. When how you put together the piping for a sink may not translate into reputation and may not translate into sales when it comes to principles. And I think you said it best. Whoever's been involved with permaculture or regenerative agriculture or even design work knows it depends. It depends on the context of the situation. The problem is that when we give that to a client and they call us up, they're like, well, hey, I want to hire you. How do I do it? And you say, it depends. That word just creates so much tension in my body and a client's body. I know you and I have talked about horror stories from personal sales when we've tried to buy something. When somebody says, well, it depends. And I think everybody, when they hear that, they can go back in their mind going like, depends on what? Like, I want to buy a generator from you. Like, how hard is this? And if it is hard, why am I spending time, money, and energy talking to you? So I remember a specific client way back when, and they called me up and they said, hey, we've got this specific problem. They were great, actually. They're like, specific problem, specific issue. How do we solve it? And I was like, well, it depends, which is true, which is honest. Like, I don't know yet. And we're going to talk about the fact that we diagnose and we understand that we have to diagnose. But as soon as we give doubt to a potential client, they're going to take that potential doubt and they're going to run as far as they can, usually away from us, not towards us. So I remember that a number of times. And I remember selling a few spots and courses and people saying, so what can I expect? And this was before I started doing long write-ups and telling people, it's like, well, it'll be great. There'll be good people and great education, just like big, broad things that you could say about anything. And it's kind of like you're reading the horoscopes, like, well, today you're going to meet somebody and you're going to have a conversation. And when you hear that kind of stuff, I know as a buyer, I get so frustrated. So I think one of the main things I've realized over my time period of being in business and selling is that the more I don't sell, the more I tell exactly what I do and exactly how I do it and what I don't do and what I do, I find that I stop selling and I just start trying to figure out if this person and I can work really well together. And I think that's been probably the biggest aha moment or epiphany. For everybody who's on the live, feel free to go into the chat bar into YouTube and just say, hey, hi, this is me. This is where I'm from. And one thing you're hoping to get out of the webinar today. It helps us to give a sense. And Rob and I are very malleable. If you put something up that's really specific, we're going to try and answer it for you. So feel free to do that now. Rob, in terms of moments of clarity, did you have any like big turning points where you're like, okay, I got to do this differently, or you saw somebody or you said something that made you go, okay, that was a good one, I'm going to have to remember to do that again?
Yeah, I'm kind of putting the horse before the cart here, but probably one of the biggest aha moments for me, kind of again looking inwards and trying to understand this friction that I was feeling when I first started trying to sell projects, and as I improved my sales process, was this concept of a guarantee. And the guarantee I think achieves a number of things, and it makes people feel, at least the people that are offering the service, it makes people feel really um, vulnerable, I think. And I remember feeling that sense of vulnerability in myself when I first started guaranteeing all of my work. And let's unpack that a little bit. So part of it is like, well, I'm a small operator, and I'm potentially selling fairly large jobs, and I'm potentially going to invest an enormous amount of my life into helping somebody solve this problem. And if they decide that they don't like what I've done, and I've told them that I have a guarantee, then they're going to ask for their money back, in spite of the fact that I've probably done a pretty good job. So how do you manage that risk of that guarantee? So there was that kind of initial vulnerability. But the other thing that the guarantee did for me, and we can talk a little bit about guarantees and clients and stuff from the client perspective in a second. But the thing that the guarantee did for me was it allowed me to stretch a little bit, not stretch beyond my capacity or my capability, but knowing that one of the things that I learned as I kind of went through this whole consulting thing, and as I thought about previous jobs that I had taken on, was this idea that consultants are constantly getting paid to learn. And that might sound a little bit unethical, but the reality is that when we take on people's problems, most of the time the problems are completely novel and new to us. And so if we knew what the answers were, we wouldn't necessarily need to take on large engagements with these folks and try and sort out their problems and their options. And so inevitably you'll end up taking on a project that you've never had to deal with before. And so for me, that always felt really nervous. It was nerve-wracking for me knowing that I was going to potentially take on somebody's problem and I'd never solved that specific problem again. And what if I failed? And so offering a guarantee was a way for me internally to come to terms with the fact that I was going to be having to learn new skills. And in the event that I couldn't learn new skills, or I couldn't come to a solution for this client because I care deeply about creating value and solving their problem, that I could, at the very least, I could give them their money back. And at the most, I would have ended up wasting a bunch of my time and a bunch of theirs, but at least they wouldn't be out the cash. And so that really put my mind at ease with regards to this role, that strange role that we take on as consultants and coaches and problem solvers. And then coming to the client side, and I'll pass this back over to you, because I think that this concept has had a big role in your life as well. But when you come to the table and are willing to stand 100% behind the work that you do, obviously you have to have a way of managing that risk, which we can talk about a little bit later if people are interested. But from a client's perspective, if you've got a clear and defined process with which you're selling, and so it's really crystal clear with regards to how you're going to operate, and at the end of that you say, and by the way, we're so confident in our process that we guarantee the results to you. And this guarantee, based on all the conversations you and I have had, has permeated all of the services and products that we have, and I believe it's done the same for you. So I don't know, I think guarantees have had a similar effect on you, Jav, and I'd love to get your take on how guarantees have played a role in your sales process and in your contracting process.
Yeah, I think again, kind of taking that moment and stepping back and kind of taking the big conversation. What is a guarantee, and why did I employ it? So a guarantee is basically saying that if somebody comes to me with a problem, be it, hey, I'm thinking about a land design client who was looking for a pre-purchase assessment, trying to find a good piece of land first. I guaranteed that I would make sure that they were able to understand their goals, so that way they could then engage me for a second round, or somebody else if they wanted, to actually find the piece of land. And when we came back to what are your goals and what are your objectives, I said, I guarantee that you will get to this point. Now, that for me changed everything, because we don't have a really good apprentice mentorship process anymore, basically in life, but definitely not in areas that we're pioneering. So in regenerative design and adaptive design and resilient design and permaculture design, there's no really great mentorship process or program or individuals we can learn from for 5 or 6 years, or, going back to the turn of the century, being indentured to and signing contracts, and they pay for our food, but we're indentured to them for 4 or 5 years. All of that process we don't have anymore. So we have other structures that have come into play, things like the Better Business Bureau, where you literally pay to be a part of their membership and supposedly paying tells everybody else that you're actually a good business. Luckily now we have things like third-party review services like Google or otherwise, but that too, as Rob and I have both experienced in the last year, can have unintended consequences or can be misled or swayed. So really, how do you know that you're doing great work? And that's what got me. How do you know you're doing great work in 2018? I think one of the ways to do it, 2019, 2020, doesn't matter, is by saying, okay, I'm going to guarantee my work. I'm going to make sure we cross this finish line that we set out. And to that effect, and this is a great one for Jen to think about, because we're talking about contracts, is when you have a guarantee, what you're guaranteeing becomes your contract. And so if I'm working in land-based conversations, be it we're going to build a watershed plan and a water resiliency plan, so that way you have water going into the future. Or if I'm working with somebody with limiting beliefs or mindset conversations and saying, okay, I just talked to a gentleman in Australia 2 days ago in what I call a good fit call, but is a sales call. When they laid down that they'd been depressed for 30 years and they weren't able to do their landscaping business anymore, I said, great. These are things I've done before. And I feel so confident in that. I know that we can alleviate this issue and we can get you to a metric that we're going to discuss in the future about that. And that's incredible, in either situation, to be able to walk up to somebody and say, we'll get you across an incredible objective line that you probably haven't even set for yourself. And so guarantees, I think for me, helped to create a crosshair for not only me, but also the client. So that way we both know what we're working towards. It's kind of like putting a thesis down and knowing that everybody's on the same page. Do you found that to be true, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Just before we keep going on here, guys, I just have a quick favor. One of the things you can do to help spread the word about this webinar, if you're finding value in it, is by putting it up onto any social media feeds you've got open right now. So if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. So there's a couple of questions here, unless you want to keep riffing on guarantees for a little bit longer, Javin. Do you want to hit on that a bit more before we move on? Or?
Yeah, I think I'll say one more thing, just because every once in a while you get to an idea or a thought or a technique or a principle, and you're so enamored with it, but the mere thought of putting it into practice, put your stomach into your throat and just like gives you a headache. And guarantees was one of those things. I know you and I had spoken about it years ago, and I was super reticent. I just was like, I can't imagine offering it. Like, what would I guarantee? And that time I took was necessary. It was percolation. It was incubation. But when I finally started to say, I guarantee my work, it felt like a piece of solace I never knew I had. I was able to sit in front of people and say, I believe in my work so much that I'm willing to back it up with, in a capitalistic corporate scenario, with the highest level of integrity possible. I will do whatever is necessary to make sure that happens. And in a couple of cases, I haven't delivered by the time frame set out or whatever it might be. And so I've worked extra. And I have to tell you, I've learned more in those moments of working extra to make sure that the client is happy and ecstatic than I have in anything else. Those have been the real bonuses. So you got to think about it this way. You could go to school, you could get a mentor and all the rest of that. But I think what Rob and I have discovered is that there is another way to actually become your own mentor, or let your clients become your mentor, or your work become your mentor, by saying, I'm going to offer a guarantee and I'm going to go above, beyond, and even further to make sure that you're happy and excited about our work together. And the guarantee is that mechanism. And I think it's a brilliant mechanism.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Javin. And I think that for folks listening to this that have businesses where there's a potential to offer a guarantee, which is pretty much every business. I mean, what is a business? A business is essentially a service or product that helps solve people's problems inevitably. And so if you're integral, and then offering a guarantee is a great way to enhance that integrity, because it means you're not going to sell stuff to people that don't need your services or products, which I think is really interesting, because it helps build one of the things that we were going to talk about today, which we'll get to in a little bit, is how do you create an ethical sales process that doesn't feel icky, that doesn't feel like you're selling your soul in order to try and get a job, that keeps you at that really highest level of integrity that you can possibly be. And we'll get to that a little bit later in the phone call. But the part that I wanted to talk a little bit about, as just listening to you and having a couple of insights of my own, was this idea of if you are thinking about adding a guarantee as a competitive advantage or as a way of reassuring your clients, maybe it's some internal stuff like I was talking about earlier. It's really important that you do it correctly. And part of that means setting fences around what that guarantee actually includes. And you might be thinking, well, okay, if you're putting fences around it, how is that integral? But it's actually super integral. You need to put those fences around there, because if you've got a guarantee that is a slippery slope, then you don't even know what it is that you're guaranteeing in the first place. And so part of having an integral sales process and following it up with a contract means that you need to understand what it is that the client requires as a result of working with you. And so you and I refer to these as metrics of success. And if we have time, I've actually got a sample contract we could go through if you wanted to. But these metrics of success are basically the unspoken expectations that your client has, which is honestly, like when I'm trying to buy something from somebody, I have all of these unspoken expectations that typically are not being asked of me. Like the people that are trying to sell to me are not asking what my expectations are. And because I've spent so much time thinking about sales process, I inevitably end up trying to help other people sell to me in the sense that I'm asking them how they're going to judge whether my expectations are met, because they're not asking me them, they're not asking this themselves. And so when you're creating a guarantee, one of the most important things that you can do is create a section called metrics of success, or you can call it whatever you want. And these are basically the unspoken expectations that every one of your clients has that either doesn't get discussed during the verbal contract phase, or people are too embarrassed to talk about it, or they've never even considered it before. And so these unspoken expectations, which become spoken, end up informing at least my own guarantee process, so that at the end of our collaboration, we can go back and say, well, we hit this one and we hit this one and we hit this one and we didn't quite get this one. So I better go back to the drawing table and just make sure that I've nailed that out of the park. And so now your client knows that they're going to pay X number of dollars for this product or service. It's going to be delivered in this time frame. Here's the steps that you're going to take to fulfill it. And at the end of it, we're going to rate the success of our collaboration together based on these statements that we've co-written as a result of this sales process, or this good fit call, as you and I call it, that we've engaged in on the front end. And so everything's out on the table, crystal clear. There's no unspoken things, or there always are some, but we try and eliminate them as much as possible before we engage in the work.
Great point, Rob. That idea of metrics, that idea of hitting signposts as you go along is important, and that'll be different for everybody. Just want to welcome everybody again. If you're new, feel free to put your name, where you're from, something you're looking to get out of the call today, and also feel free to hit the like button. The more tips you put in the tip jar, the more tips it gets, more analytics moves up, and then Rob gets a shiny something from YouTube at some point, I'm pretty sure. That's the whole point.
I'll cut it in half for you, John.
So Jen, great to have you here. Ben Garrett of Healthy Homes, thanks for coming. Ryan, awesome to have you on the call. Brian Wanacott, great to have you as well. Rob, I think what we should do is we should start running down these questions. It'll help us to kind of hit them as we go. And then I think we'll pop back to sales and just the sale call arc and talk about how the questions we ask in the sales call, how that informs the contract. I think that'll probably come up in the first question. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Jen, thanks so much for being here. So your question, I haven't started. Oh, actually, first I want to say big thanks to Ben for already sharing the video on Facebook. Thanks, mate. Jen, I haven't started to consider contracts yet. Legalities, finances are not my strong suit. So learning how to put together a basic contract would be great. Also, whether I need to hire a lawyer or not. Great question, Jen. I think everybody's been in that place at some point or another. And unless truthfully you've had you've been blessed to have a parent or a friend or family member in business. Most of us don't have a strong suit in legalities or finances. It's definitely not in the curriculum when you go through public school. It seems like the important things are always left out. So, definitely no guilt or anything like that about that kind of situation. And bravo for putting it out there. Maybe what we'll do, Rob, is we'll talk a little bit about the sales call and then how that relates to the contract right away, if that works for you, mate.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. So one of the ways that Rob and I conduct our sales calls called good fit calls. And one of the reasons we call them good fit, because that's actually what we're doing. We're not trying to make a sale. We're indifferent to the sale. The sale doesn't have to happen. It's not the only thing that has to happen. But more importantly, we have to understand if these people are a great fit for us and are we a good fit for them? If anybody just wants to answer this question, has anybody ever taken a job for the money and regretted it? Feel free to throw that answer into the chat. I'll raise my hand. I've definitely done it a few times, especially when I was younger. So when we have this good fit call, a couple of questions come up. And one of the questions, first and foremost, is what's your situation? And that's this nice, big, broad question that allows people to say, I've got a husband, or I've got a wife, or I've got a partner, or I'm by myself. And this is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm interested in. This is how much land I have. I don't have land. I'm looking for land. The whole gambit. It's their moment to tell a bit of their story. And the great thing is that if you open it up with those open-ended questions, they tell you a lot. They tell you about what's going on, what's happening. They tend to, I find that they tend to overshare a little bit, which is great because I get a good sense of who they are as people. But that situation really gives me a sense and lands me into their situation. Normally, I have to ask some follow-up questions like, how old are you and your partner? Where have you come from recently in terms of your work or where you've been living? What's the big idea in the future? Those kind of questions help to round out the situation question. Anything you wanted to add to the situation conversation, Rob?
Just that it's easy to overdo the situation. You can end up spending too much time there if you're not careful. And so while it's really important to spend time in the situation, to get to the heart of the problem or the liability that you're trying to solve, we really have to be careful not to spend the full 20 minutes on the situation. And I'm mostly speaking to myself, my previous self, my past self, when I first started thinking about establishing the whole situation that they were in. And so it's important that you spend a little bit of time there, ask really good questions, and then keep moving on. So yeah, keep going there, Javin.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And Rob brought up another great point there, is that most, if not all of our good fit calls come out with the expectation of being 20 minutes long, which is great. It's low risk for the client. It's low risk for us. You can kind of think about it as a really low risk coffee business date. Nobody has to worry about anything more than 20 minutes. So the next question is, what are the specific problem or problems that you're looking to have resolved or explored during our collaboration? And one of the ways I've said this for folks who have never been asked this question directly, and it kind of shows how I've been in this for so long, it's hard for me to tell the water as I'm a goldfish, is as you are coming along Avenue A and I'm coming along Avenue B and we interact, what has to change when you're on the other side of the road? I've also said it as, if I'm a lemonade stand and you're coming for a lemonade, what specific lemonade are you looking for? Or what are you looking to solve? And that gives us a sense of the problems. And it could be, I'm looking to find a piece of property for me and my family. I'm trying to understand why every time I'm working with a client right now about selling, which is kind of ironic. Why is it every time I go to sell, I feel friction and I feel like I'm stumbling over my words? But it gives us a sense of the specific problems we're trying to work out. I worked with a client with 300 acres last year, and the big thing was water. They wanted to understand their watershed, how the water flowed, how they could capture and store more of it. So that was a really specific problem. And it gives us a sense to pinpoint, if you will, as diagnosing. And this is the first step in diagnosing. You're starting to ask about symptoms, like, what are your symptoms? How do they feel? Where do you think they're coming from? And it gives us a sense of what's going on for the client. Other questions or comments that you ask about problems of your clients, Rob?
No, nothing specifically. I think it's really important, though, that we, as you say, diagnose what's going on in their situation, and that really does inform kind of the next stage of the conversation that you're having there. And it also helps you to, as you're starting to ask these questions, you're madly taking notes on the other side and trying to understand the language that they're using and the words they're using and the emotion that's associated with those words. That's going to give you a lot of important insights with regards to how you write the contract, but also will play a role later in the collaboration that you find yourself working with these clients if you do end up finding an opportunity to collaborate together.
Yeah, great point. Great point. So one of the follow-up questions I ask around problems, and I actually don't know, Rob, if you asked this question, but I ask, specific to each problem, what are some of the obstacles you've encountered thus far? Because that gives me a sense of what specifically might you have tried or what has created an impediment for you being able to go forward. So when I was speaking to these folks about this watershed management process, one of the obstacles was we don't know where the piped water from a diversion drain comes from. We don't know any of the legalese around that. We don't know really about how to store or hold water. So already they were starting to create the boundaries of the project. And it's a question I really love asking, especially when it comes to things like land design, because it gives you a sense of how motivated the clients have been to solve this problem. Like, have they done any of the work themselves? Or are they just coming to you with hands wide open, like, solve my problem, here you go? And same thing with the life design conversation. If somebody says, you know, I just have no motivation and I've been in the same job for 25 years and I need to change. And you say, great. So what are some of the obstacles? And more often than not, I just hear, I have no idea where to start. Or I feel like every time I start, I hear my dad's voice in the back of my mind, you can't do anything. And it's great because it gives me exactly where the issues are and helps me to go forward. Obstacles, Rob, anything to add, or do you use it as well?
Indirectly, I don't specifically ask for obstacles, but that's a really fantastic open-ended question. I think that it's a really brilliant thing to think about when you're talking to them. As you said, it gives you a sense of how motivated and how much they've already done on their own. Really, really smart.
Rob, how about you take the next one and we'll switch roles for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the next one is kind of you lead into it from asking about problems, and these are implication questions. And I've actually found that understanding implication questions are basically the consequence of not acting on these problems. And implications are generally pretty difficult to get out of folks if you're in a consumer to or business to consumer relationship, mostly because people have not necessarily quantified or qualified, what the consequence of not solving that problem is. And so it can be a little bit of a challenge to ask implication questions and to actually get answers that are meaningful. When you're selling business to business, however, it's quite a bit easier in that, businesses typically have accountants and they've got bookkeepers and they're looking at their books on a regular basis. And so if you're trying to sell something that's going to end up saving labor, for example, a shredder or a photocopier or a computer system or something like that, likely the business is going to already have made a business case to acquire another piece of technology or equipment in order to reduce labor, or maybe they have a repetitive strain injury, and so it's costing a whole bunch of money in massage therapy or whatever it is. And so they'll actually have a dollar and cents figure associated with the cost of not acting. For me anyways, I tend to work a lot with clients that are trying to build resilient homes, acreages, and farms. And so we end up spending more time on the qualitative side as opposed to the quantitative side. The quantitative side is really important for my clients, yet they don't necessarily realize it because the cost of making mistakes in buildings, making water harvesting mistakes, making renewable energy mistakes is super high. But they don't necessarily know what they don't know. And so we tend to work more on an emotional level, like what are the implications of not actually getting a food forest or having a secure food supply or storing enough rainwater to get you through a drought or whatever it happens to be. And it takes some massaging in order to understand these implication questions. And implications are really important because especially if a client hasn't thought about the downside, is essentially what you're trying to talk about, of not solving this problem with or without you, they end up having insights on their own with regards to how they need to proceed within their own life, because they recognize that there's potentially more gravity to the problems that they face than they may have initially thought about. And that can be really advantageous for your client. And while I don't sell a large percentage of my jobs, and I actually see that as a success for myself personally, I'm not trying to sell large volumes of work. And I'm really selective about who I work with. I want to be really excited to work with my clients, because an engagement with me can last up to 3 years. Inevitably, asking these implication questions provides an enormous amount of value to the person on the other side, even if they don't hire me in the end, because it allows them to, something in their brain shifts, and it allows them to have insights of their own, which helps them to start diagnosing their own problems and start making and taking actions towards resolving them. How about you, Javin?
Yeah, so implications, I had a hard time with that word when I was first taught it, and I just translated it to cost. What are these problems costing you? Time, money, energy, sleep. What's the implication? I used implication afterwards, and that really helped people to get it. And with these clients I was working with to find a piece of property, when I said, "What's the cost?" They said, "The cost is that we hate where we're living, and every day our relationship becomes more tenuous." And that's a tangible cost. Like, anybody who's been in partnership before and knows that there's friction, that can be tenuous as you move along, and the wire becomes finer and finer and finer and finer. When I was speaking to an individual about a food force years ago, and we talked about the implications, they said, "Well, I want to be able to have this food force provide for my family's food throughout the winter. We want to be able to produce this food and can and store over the winter." And so I said, "Well, what's the value of food that you're currently purchasing during the winter?" And they said, "Well, it's roughly about 10 grand over the winter." I said, "Okay, well, how long do you want to be on the property?" "Well, we want this to be our feet first exit property," which is a nice thing I picked up from a client once. It's the property you want to die on. And it was like, great. So you want to create something that produces $10,000 worth of value for you per year, per 60 years. So it's a $600,000 potential problem. Okay, great. And all of a sudden they clicked. They were like, "Oh my God, of course. This is a big thing I'm trying to create. I really want to produce a lot of value in conversations." And so it helps to frame the conversation, because I think a lot of people, when they're starting to look at land design or land conversations, because no one has set the frame for them before that, the thing they go to is whatever's closest to their mind. And they usually think landscaping. And the services that Rob and I offer are at such an order of magnitude, and I'm sure a number of you watching, that if we help one client not put one house into one drainage, that's almost anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 solution. Because if you don't put a house in a drainage, you don't have to move it. You don't have to rebuild it. You don't have to lose it when you have debris events that flood down after a big storm or flood, or combination of first a forest fire and then a storm. And now we have a huge amount of soil movement. All of these situations that we solve for our clients are large. And for the most amount of the time, clients actually don't know the level that we provide them unless we tell them or show them or help frame the conversation. So implications is a great one. Rob, what's the final big question that we usually ask?
Yeah, so the last one is the reverse of the implication question, which is essentially the positive upside. So we first established the downside, which is the implication, and then it's the upside at the end. And so if you do get this right, how is it going to benefit your life, your finances, your emotions, your relationships, all of those aspects. And this is, again, when they start to have insights about the importance of getting it right, essentially. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's going to be with you that's getting it right. But because we kind of frame the whole thing as a fit call, and the beginning of one of these calls is really built around this concept of us finding a fit with them and them finding a fit with us. It's usually in sales, it's a salesperson thinks or is trained to think that everybody's a fit and we just have to convince them to give us our money. And that's definitely not the approach that Javin and I take in our sales calls. The approach is no, I'm not, like me as a salesperson or me as the person potentially going to be doing the work, I'm not convinced that we should work together. And one of the reasons I'm not convinced we should work together is because all of my work is guaranteed. And the minute that you guarantee that, you're very cautious about entering into projects that you can't solve or that you don't have the confidence to solve. And so the last question, the payoff essentially is not having to rebuild your house. And that could potentially be worth, as Javin said, $500,000, or choosing the right equipment to generate electricity. And so not being sold the wrong type of gear that inevitably will not meet your vision and values. And so it's the exact opposite of what it is that we were just discussing when we were talking about implications. And the best way to approach this is, again, to try, if you can, to quantify the value. And so as a result of all the things that you're going to solve for them, and if it ends up being $1 million in savings, let's just say, that starts to give you a clue with regards to the scale of the project, what it is that you're guaranteeing, how they're going to rate your success at the very end, because you have a list of liabilities or problems you're going to solve, and whether or not you should take the job on. At the end of asking all these open-ended questions, you should have a pretty good idea with regards to whether or not this job is going to be a fit for you. And that's going to be coming up in, very shortly thereafter, after we've kind of gotten through this section. How do you handle this part of the call, Javin?
I usually say, what's on the other side of the problem? Like, why are you taking time, money, and energy to try and solve this? What's the motivation? Where are you trying to get to? And with the clients who are looking for a piece of property, the big one was, we want a place to raise a family. We want to be able to, they had a lot of specifics, but we want freedom. We want security. We want the ability to think about our kids in a safe and comfortable space, and just be able to start putting down our roots and building a home. And one of the things I've learned, and this is a really important thing for anybody who does sales calls, which is not necessarily something I'm practicing very well on this call, but after you've spoken, leaving a lot of time. So leaving time as somebody speaks and just letting that hang there, because, part of this is interviewing. This is an interview process. You are interviewing them to be a client of yours, and they're interviewing you. When we try to give a lot of non-fluences, a lot of like, aha, okay, all right, start managing emotions, we interrupt somebody's thought process. And especially on this question, when you ask somebody like, what's on the other side of this for you? And they talk and they talk, and then they stop, and you give them space and time to think about it, they usually come up with some really deep conversations that are important for them. And again, we're not in this for the finance, we're in this for the fit, and allowing people to get to that depth with you is really important. So pauses, I find, are really important within that last question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we tend to not be active listeners, and that can really create the space that's required for people to really get to that deeper level. It's a great point. So once you've gotten to the end of this sales call, usually this is the piece that people tend to avoid, and it usually means that we have to start talking about money, and we have to talk about metrics. I mean, this is assuming that it's a fit. If it's not a fit at this point, I'm usually recommending other people they should go and talk to. And so if it is a fit, then we have to talk about, what your availability is and how your process works and what your guarantee looks like. And every business is going to be a little bit different for that. But it's really important that you are not shy to talk about money, because if you're shy about talking about money, your clients will pick up on it, and it'll become an awkward conversation. And so you have to, in your mind, be premeditated and have had this conversation with yourself already, and have a clear understanding of what it is that you're going to charge and what you're going to achieve as a result of that by that period of time. So that when it comes time to saying, okay, yeah, I think I can help you with your, in fact, I'm really bad for that. You should never say, I think I can help you with your problem. You either can or you can't. Your clients don't want to hear you say, I think I can help you. It's like, yeah, I can help you with that problem. Here are the next steps that we take generally to work with you. This is what it's going to cost, and I'm available to start on your project within 2 or 3 months. And generally it lasts for 3 to 6 months, depending on the scale of the project that we decide to take on as a result of writing a contract. And something that I had to learn the hard way is that contract writing takes a long time. It takes a lot of prefrontal cortex, energy and thinking. And so I'm very clear with my clients that I will not write a contract for them unless we have a verbal agreement in place first, which is basically agreeing to what I'm going to achieve, by when, for how much. And once I've sorted that out verbally, at that point, if they've given me the green light verbally, at that point, I will write a contract for them. If you don't do this, you'll inevitably spend your whole life writing contracts and only selling a percentage of the jobs. So you do need to ask people to take some skin in the game, essentially, and commit. And if they commit to you, then and it's a fit, then you can actually invest that time necessary to try and make sure that both parties are super clear about what it is you're going to achieve, by when, and how much. And so those are just a couple of pointers that have made all the difference to me in my business, around, selling and contracts and finding fit and making sure that, overall, the process is smooth and enjoyable for both parties. And it's not awkward and stuttery and no one really knows where they left off at the end of the conversation. How do you typically finish off your sales calls, Javin?
So I have a few extra questions I ask about just because I'm curious about efforts and conversations. So one of them is, I say, where'd you hear about me? So it gives me a little feedback in terms of what efforts I put out there in the world to build my reputation are coming back. I ask, how motivated are you to solve this problem? That gives me a sense of where they are. What's your timeline, time frame, all the rest of it. And similar to Rob, proposals have become a 4-letter word to me. So if we have a conversation with somebody, we can usually hash things out. What do we do when we're texting for too long and we just, I can't figure this out? Like, I just thought I'd call you. It's so much easier. So you're calling somebody and you really want to get to a no or a yes really quickly. Anybody who comes to our business is a yes, a maybe, or a no. And if we are actually going to invest a bit of our time, which is so precious and so limited, and if all of the stuff online hasn't helped somebody made a decision that they are a yes, maybe, or a no yet, and they're coming for the phone call, then by the end of this call, we should be as sure as they are. And like Rob was saying, I'll end with, I've worked with people like this before. I know I can help you. Or, this is a very new and rare thing I've never done before, which Jen, I see that you're putting down those. So how would you price a product that you are guaranteeing that you don't know much about? And sometimes I have to say, I need to think about this for a bit. And that's fair. If you want to read a great book about business, read Anything You Want by Derek Sivers. In that, he made me realize that our businesses is anything we want. And if we want to have ecstatic clients, sometimes when we're called and we don't know what's going on, we have to say, that's a neat idea. I'm going to have to think about that. I have been thinking about a good fit call now, and I've been in contact with the client for about 3.5 months because it's such a unique situation. And I'm still have a few things to work out, still have a few people to talk to. So Jen, if I was in your situation and I put something out and had a conversation with somebody and they asked me about something I had never done, say a natural swimming pool, something I know a little bit about, but I'd have to learn a little bit about, especially the price, I would say, I imagine the range will be in between like this price and this price. And that's a great thing to get used to, is ranges. But I'll have more information for you if you decide to work together. I'll be able to nail down a price. And that's one of those moments of you being honest with the client and yourself and saying, I could absolutely do that. I'd have to look a little bit deeper to know exactly the price, but it's going to be roughly in between, natural swimming pool, depending on size, will be anywhere from $15,000 to $45,000 designed and installed. And we're going to go through process to make sure that that's a good fit for you and all the rest of it. Similar to Rob, I say, before we go into a contract, you're going to have to give me a verbal yes, either by email or phone call. If you have any other questions, if you want to have another call with you or your spouse or somebody else, happy to jump on the line. Because again, you can sort a lot out in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And then we end up having the contract call. So what I do next is I take all that information and I use Evernote as a tool. I've used it for, I think I'm 11 years now, 12 years in. And I make copious amounts of notes and I translate that language into my contract. And Rob and I's contracts started very similar a couple of years ago. And I think we've diverged a little bit, but generally they follow a pretty standard conversation. And so the first bit on mine is situation. And it's maybe like a sentence or two, like, you are such and such, you've established that you have this and this problem, and we spoke at this time. Rob, do you still do that, or is there something else there for you?
Yep. No, same thing.
Okay. And then for you, what's next?
So typically I go into objectives and actions. So these are kind of action items that I'm going to take on, and then objectives as a result of the work, and then metrics of success, and then terms and conditions typically is how our contracts flow.
So I think that answers, Jen, your first question of, what do I need to do for a contract? I know at the beginning I was using boilerplate, semi-legal, or not semi-legal, but contracts that were from a legal standpoint and had been moved through a legal process. But as time went on, I found more and more making it simple language. This is the objective of our work. We're trying to figure out what is a good fit for you guys in terms of a land base, the deliverables or the actions, what I'll do, what you'll do, the deliverables, what I'm going to give you at the end of the conversation, the terms and conditions, how much money, when, how long, and then accountabilities, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? And finally, metrics of success. So, if you're doing a swimming pool, a metric of success might be, and this is why I love metrics of success, I'm swimming in my swimming pool and I love it. Like sometimes metrics can be very personable. And the nice thing about that is if you've ever read a contract like that, you go, I can read this. This is logical. There's nothing hidden here. And I think for me, that's been a really refreshing part of the way that I've done my contracts going forward, is that it's been very easy to read and understand. Do you find that, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things when we started writing contracts in this way was not having to worry about all the legalese that I didn't even understand. And how was I to represent? I was buying a solar array for a client recently, and I got given this really long contract, and I had to call them up and say, I'm not signing this. This is ridiculous. Like, how am I supposed to understand anything? Do you even understand this? Like, what? And I highlighted a few clauses, and I said, what does this mean? And they didn't even know. So it's like, how can you ask me to sign this thing if you can't even explain the terms and conditions on your own contract? It's ridiculous. And so we can nail out most of these issues just by using, as you said, simple language. We're getting to the end of the hour here, guys, and there's a couple more questions that we can quickly address, unless you wanted to add anything to that, Javin. But before we answer the last few questions here, I just wanted to make an announcement. So starting on October 17th, we've got a fall running of the Regenerative Business Mentorship Program. It's a 3-month program with a break over Christmas. And this is basically what we do for the entire time. We deliver principles to your inbox that will help you scale up your business, make it more fun, reduce the friction, reduce the tears, reduce the sleepless nights, so that you can do the work that you love and move through the stuff that you don't, and simplify the stuff that you don't enjoy, become more profitable, fill your wallet, and continue to help people to fix and save the world. It's a program that Javin and I wish that we had when we first got started. It's based upon all of the mistakes and the trials and tribulations that we've gone through in our own businesses, which have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences as well. So you get two sometimes contrary opinions, which can be very valuable because all of our businesses and activities are all different. And so we come at it sometimes from two different lenses, which should be very, very valuable. Every week we answer your questions, just like we're doing right now. And if you're interested in that, you can totally sign up for a free phone call. I'll put a link in the comments here shortly. And either Javin or myself will have a conversation with you to make sure that it's a fit, because this program is guaranteed as well. All of the stuff we do within Regenerative Business Mentorship has a series of metrics that we measure to determine whether or not you get value out of the program. So we only take people that will benefit from the program itself. So Javin, should we just round out? Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that, and then round out some questions there, and then we can close out the call?
Yeah, sounds good. I would say for anybody listening, considering the RBM program, take a look at a couple of videos. One was a recent one we did with Edible Landscapes Design, Joshua Wegler, with Our Land Organics, John Hemmerly, and with Rachel from Little Moon Farm. listen to the people who've been in the program, listen to the successes they've had, listen to their struggles, listen to the amount of money they've been able to produce from it. Really see it as an investment conversation. And something that Rob and I both endeavor is that we try to 10x whatever the investment is in the work that folks invest into the work we collaborate on. And that's been the case for the majority of the people that have come through the program, especially those that have put the time, money, and energy to ask the questions, to show up and to apply. So if you are interested in taking a look at that, again, vergepermaculture.ca/RBM, check it out, October 17th. We still don't know how many we're going to run a year. And I think we're always thinking less. So if there is interest, I highly recommend you check it out. I wish I had this years ago. But that's how it happens. Sometimes you got to go first. So I think what we'll do, Rob, is we'll run through these questions and then we'll call it a day. What do you think?
Sounds great, Ben.
Awesome. And by call it a day, I mean, go back to my massive to-do list. So Jen, hopefully that answers your question about contracts. If you're feeling like you need to bring a lawyer into it to even make it more specific, great. But I would ask yourself the question, if you have to bring in a lawyer, is it actually the type of work you want to be doing? Like, can you make it simple? And that's something that I really found. I just wasn't making it simple. Ryan, hey, Rob and Javin, could you talk about some of the legal necessities of working as a permaculture consultant in Canada, contractor license, insurance, and any specifics to be legally sound? Rob?
Personally, just because I'm an engineer, I carry liability insurance, and it's not cheap. And insurance is kind of a bit of a ratchet. So if you stop paying for it, then the stuff that you have done previous to that is no longer covered, obviously. And so it's something that you have to continue to pay into even after you've retired. So something to think about. I think that I've talked to a lot of people within my profession about it and whether I should or shouldn't engage it. If you are a consultant and you're managing massive amounts of money and you're taking risk in the work that you're doing, it's probably not a bad idea because, there's always due diligence that you miss is sometimes difficult to predict. And I just ran into something like this just recently on a project in Saskatchewan where we just about put in a pond. I did a huge amount of due diligence, and sure, lo and behold, right before the pond went in, we discovered that we potentially could be digging into an aquifer that would literally going to blow up in our faces, and we would be unable to shut it off. Essentially, artisanal well, very low or close to the surface. And so, not the type of thing that I would have thought of checking into or thought about anyways. It was kind of very happenstance that we ended up finding out about it. So there are always things that you can't predict that, that the insurance is there to kind of cover your ass, if you will. As far as the legality of being a consultant, it's different in Canada than it is in the United States. There's lots of consultants up here that don't necessarily have a consulting license. I know in the States, there's all sorts of rules and regulations about being a contractor and a consultant and all that stuff. It's pretty open field here. If you have expertise in an area, you can call yourself a consultant. So in terms of your comfort level and carrying errors and omission and liability insurance, if you call an insurance company, they're going to give you a specific answer. And so it's a question that you have to ask yourself with regards to what kind of risks are you actually taking? Are you putting in food forests, with shovels, or are you bringing in 25-ton excavators to put in, 35-foot trees and potentially hitting power and gas lines and all that stuff? So you really do need to have a conversation with yourself. And maybe this is where a lawyer comes in, to ask them what kind of risks you're actually taking on and how you're potentially exposed. I did a lot of thinking about this. And so this is the conclusion that I came to. And we all love to hate insurance, but when we start dealing at that scale where you can potentially cause a $100,000 or $1 million or $5 million problem, it's important to consider the consequences on the other side as well.
It's a good point. And it's one that I think can kind of stab people with a bit of fear, which is good. It's definitely good to be stabbed with the fear pre-job as opposed to post-job or post-job and post-problem. it gives you a sense of if you're eligible from a risk assessment to be working in this field as a consultant, a designer, installer, if that's something you want to take on as risk. As Rob was saying, contractors normally don't need licenses in Canada. It is a province by province conversation. In British Columbia, it's not necessary. Electricians are the only ones that have to be licensed, as far as I know, and gas fitters need a permit. So it's kind of open. The guarantee for me is one of the ways that I keep myself honest. And then the second piece is ensuring that the company structure you have has a bit of liability built into it. So if you are taking on $1 million, $2 million, $3 million problems that could come up in your face, making sure that your assets as a person are not tied up in your assets of the company that might be coming towards you. So that means moving into a corporation or some kind of limited liability conversation. So that way you do have some protection.
Yeah, let's hit the last question there, and then we'll call it a day. So the last question was, how do you price your services, guarantee it if you don't know what it is that you're doing? And this is a fantastic conversation, and this could actually inform the next video, and I think it should. So if you found this useful, we're going to be going live again. Stay tuned to my YouTube channel, Javin's YouTube channel, and both of our Facebook pages. And if you're on our newsletter, you'll get notification as well. But very briefly, most operators give away the highest value offering that they provide to their clients for free or for very cheap. And so this is the diagnosis portion. So the first thing that I sell to anybody is a job to basically understand the job. So I call it a pre-feasibility or a feasibility study. And essentially what I'm doing in that time that I'm spending with my client is I'm creating a problem definition. So they're paying me to understand their problem, knowing that we may not work together as a result of that first piece of work. So every phase of the way along an implementation or cooperation or collaboration, like I like to call them, is a standalone piece of work. And so 3/4 of the solution, this is a quote from Gandhi, 3/4 of the solution is actually in the diagnosis. And so why, when contractors give away this information for free in a free quote, they're not actually doing you a service, they're doing themselves a service, because they're not necessarily diagnosing what you need, they're diagnosing what they sell. And so we are hired by people to think about their problems deeply, such that as the result of thinking about their problem, every step along the way, we've provided them with value, and they can walk off and go in another direction, either to solve the rest of it on their own, to hire another contractor, or potentially to continue on with us. And so I like to think of the way that our company works as a funnel. And so the first part of the funnel is a very broad understanding of the situation. And every step along the way, we're trying to fail the project. If the project doesn't fail, then it moves into the next phase. And each time we get a little bit closer to that, the funnel in the bottom there, the narrow pipe that goes into the bottle, and that is ultimately the design phase. And so if you look at how a funnel is designed, most of the funnel is actually at the very top, and a very small amount is at the very bottom. A properly diagnosed project is actually very simple to solve in the end. And so most people, I find, spend too little time understanding the problem and too much time trying to solve it before they've fully understood it. Javin, do you have any last points there to add?
Yeah, I've got a few. One of them is when you're taking a look at a funnel, the point of the funnel isn't the top. The point of the funnel for you is the bottom. So everybody's trying to get to the bottom, but you want to be able to know that what you're pouring in and the funnel itself is necessary. And so taking the time at the beginning helps you ensure that what you're doing has the most amount of effect and ability for folks. So it's a really important conversation and something we dive deeply in the Regenerative Business Mentorship program. So I appreciate that, Rob. The second thing I wanted to say to everybody else is Brian had a great conversation about, he's in Edmonton working with animal farmers to change their operation from manure spreading to compost making and spreading operation. It's scary and many unknowns in terms of compost is something that sometimes more science is needed. Finding I cannot guarantee anything, but do my best. Just your insight. So I've worked actually with a soil food web consultant on exactly this issue. And something that I found is that once they started to offer guarantee with a number of requirements that the clients had to walk through, and they had to checklist it. They have to say, yes, I did exactly what you said when I did it. And one of the biggest is, applying compost, extract, or tea when there is no ground cover, which means you lose the biology, it allowed them to increase the efficacy of what they were doing for clients and thus have more case studies. So one of the things you can do is you can increase your price and also increase what your clients are supposed to do when they come to it, but also have a guarantee at the end of the conversation. And that changed the entire conversation for this colleague I was working for. They were now able to say, yep, I can absolutely help you. Or because they had had a couple that had failed, they were able to weed out either the individuals or the sites that didn't have the amount of labor necessary to be able to have success. And I think that's a really important piece that a lot of people forget about. 2 requests for everybody here. Request number 1. I want you to write something you took away from the conversation today in the chat bar in YouTube. One thing you took away that you felt was absolutely worth it for the time. Second request, bigger request, takes a bit more time. I want you to take the URL of this video. I want you to post it to one of your social networks and say, just watch this. This is something I took away. I think you guys should watch it too. If that's the case. If it's not the case, if it was terrible, you also have to say why in the chat bar. So you're not off the hook either way. A lot of people say they put information out for free into the world. I don't think anything's for free. You watch this, you put in time, money, and energy. We put in time, money, and energy. There's background technology. I could show you all the lights and everything that are here to make me look at least this good. It's not great, but it's not bad. I think it's the shirt that's actually doing it today. But it takes time, money, and energy. So it is a request. So before you leave today, my request is there's something you took away from this conversation in the chat bar. Throw it down there. Let us know what the response was. We love feedback. It helps us to become better. And my second one is, again, post this link again on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on whatever you're on, and let people know why it was valuable. The big thing Rob and I want to do is help people catch this wave because it's a big wave and it's getting bigger every single day. So again, if you're interested in the Regenerative Business Mentorship, you can go to vergepermaculture.ca/RBM. If you're keen on the next conversation we're going to be doing next week, which we decided would be, what was it again, Rob? I'm pretty sure we thought of this already. Because we were talking about something and you're like, no, we should do sales. We were going to talk about...
I think we covered most of it today, actually, but there will be another conversation. We will announce it very soon. I'm also having a failure of memory right now, so but it'll be good. No guarantees.
Okay, sounds good.
We guarantee that, I should say, not no guarantees.
Anyways, next week we'll basically be trying to do at least one webinar every week until we launch October 17th, just to get the right people into this program, because it is an exceptional program. Folks end up talking to their accountability partners for a year afterwards thus far, having great success, knowing they've got a group of people they can call upon. We still get emails from clients and participants. So it's been a really fun time, and know that it's an enjoyable experience. It's not a grind. There's grind to it, but it is a good time. So again, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Dustin, the importance of getting paid for the discovery phase and ensuring you have the client state what the problem is. Great one to pick up, Dustin. Jen took away realizing a lawyer is not mandatory. I thought in business that might be a requirement. I'm glad to learn that we can simplify legal terminology and approach it without hiring suits. Yeah, absolutely. Or wearing them ourselves. It just means being very selective about our clients and having good conversations. So thanks for those two that threw down there. If anybody else wants to, that'd be great. Feel free to like the video before we end. And how do we send people off, Rob? Is it just a thank you and goodbye, or do you have a song and dance?
Well, I do have a song and dance, except that I'm wearing shorts right now, and they're not good shorts for dancing in. So
not YouTube friendly.
Yeah, YouTube friendly. That's right. All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for signing in, and keep an eye on our social media channels and our newsletters for the next show. We're going to be trying to do this a little bit more regularly to give you guys some insights into your own businesses, and we look forward to your questions and comments, and generally to helping you guys help everyone else and help the world and help yourself at the same time. So have an incredible week, and we'll see you guys all real soon.
Thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you soon.